Good morning, everybody. If you could please have a seat. We are about ready to get started. I want to welcome everybody to the 95th Annual Agriculture Outlook Forum. So glad to have you all here today. I'm Stephen Censky, the Deputy Secretary of Agriculture, and we're, again, so excited to have you here. I know some of you had to brave ice and sleet and snow, rain, the dark of night to get here, and so we're glad that you persevered, that you're here, and we're really looking forward to a great discussion this morning. As you know, the Agriculture Outlook Forum really is USDA's highlight of the year, in which we really talk about the state of the agriculture economy, both the bright spots, the tough spots, as well as the promise of the innovation that's coming here. And we're going to be doing some of that today. And that's what I always find so exciting about the Agriculture Outlook Forum, is that we talk about the promise of U.S. agriculture, because I truly believe that we have the most innovative farmers and ranchers, scientists, and agribusiness industry in all of the world. This year's theme of the Agriculture Outlook Forum is growing locally and selling globally. And so it's fitting we're going to be discussing quite a bit on trade here at the Agriculture Outlook Forum. We're going to be starting out this morning right away talking about the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. And so we are so pleased to have here with us both agriculture, our own Agriculture Secretary, Sonny Perdue, along with Canadian Minister Lawrence McCauley, along with the Mexican Secretary of Agriculture, Victor Villalobos. And so they're going to be talking about the USMCA and what it means to all of our economies in all of North America. Of course, we can't talk about trade. Also want to mention, as you know, of course, China. We have the negotiations with China that are ongoing. We've had our own team from USDA that was in China last week, Ted McKinney, our Undersecretary for Trade, and a large delegation from across USDA to try to address both the structural issues that are affecting our trade, as well as to work on making sure that as part of any agreement with China, that we also have robust purchase agreements. Of course, as you know, a key part of any agreement with China, an essential part, is going to have to be reform on the intellectual property issues, the forced transfer of technology, the forced licensing of technology, and those issues that both the President and Ambassador Lighthizer and others have made and emphasized so strongly. We're also excited, speaking of the promise, about free trade agreements that are going to be kicking off with Japan. So we're excited about that. And of course, as you know, for U.S. agriculture, as we looked at the TPP, Japan was always the crown jewel of that potential agreement for the United States. And so we're excited from U.S. agriculture to get underway with those negotiations. Finally, we also have free trade negotiations with the European Union, and one of our issues, of course, is that we're insisting that agriculture needs to be part of any kind of agreement. We're also, of course, there's trade issues from around the world, and so look forward to having the opportunity for us to address some of those. We also have a new farm bill, and we at USDA are very thankful that we have Congress that has crafted what we think is a very good farm bill, and President Trump signed the new farm bill. We're excited about it. We're focused 100% at USDA on implementing that farm bill now just as quickly as possible. And so we are working hard on implementation, and we are going to be announcing some of those timelines coming up in the near future. We're also going to be holding some listening sessions for producers and stakeholders to have an opportunity to provide input on how some of the provisions should be implemented. And we're going to be kicking off the first one of those for the Farm Production and Conservation Mission area next Tuesday at USDA's Jefferson Auditorium. And so we look forward to getting input on how to implement the various parts of the safety net that's administered by the Farm Service Agency, the conservation programs, NRCS, as well as crop insurance from the Risk Management Agency. So again, I want to say thank you so much for being here. We look forward to a great Agriculture Outlook Forum. Look forward to hearing from you, for your active participation in the discussions, both in the sessions here as well as out in the hallway, which I know is always one of the benefits of being here at the Ag Outlook Forum as well with your colleagues. With that, I want to introduce USDA's Chief Economist, Dr. Robert Johansen. Rob.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm going to move these aside so I can open up my projector. Well, I want to welcome you again to this 95th Annual Agricultural Outlook Forum. As the Deputy Secretary just mentioned, we really have a really great program for you, as you can tell by looking through your programs. The theme this year is growing locally, selling globally, as the Deputy Secretary mentioned. And as in previous years, we'll take time to talk about improving productivity and expanding markets. So that's not new. But this year we're going to focus a little bit more closely on biotechnology and the tremendous potential it offers for enhancing productivity, improving nutritional value, and fighting plant and animal diseases. But before I continue, I just want to take a quick minute to thank the USDA team for pulling together the Outlook this year. We didn't have a lot of time to get all of our estimates together that we normally would, as well as the logistics for today. So again, we're really happy to have you here, and I am thankful for the dedicated team at USDA for managing to make everything come together today, and looking forward to the discussion in a second with the secretaries about the new USMCA agreement. Well, a lot happened this past year. Of course, we're talking about the outlook, but a lot happened setting the stage for this coming year of production. The new Farm Bill was passed, and of course, there's been a lot going on in trade. And as the Deputy Secretary mentioned, Secretary Perdue, Secretary Villalobos from Mexico, and Minister McCauley from Canada will be here soon to discuss opportunities generated by the new USMCA agreement. And I just want to note for a second that you will have the opportunity to text in questions during their discussion using the www.slido.com website and using the directions on the card that you can find on the chairs that you sat when you came in the room here. Now, I don't want everybody looking down at their phones, which I know you'll have an inclination to do, but do know that you will be able to text in your questions, and those will be forwarded to the secretaries during their discussion. Let's move to the outlook. I plan to cover 4 main sections this morning. We could spend a lot of time talking about things, and I'll try and get through this as quickly as I can. I know that many of you often remark on how many slides I put together, so I did scale it back a little bit, and we'll have time to talk a bit about what's on them. So we're going to look a little bit at the farm economy, the outlook for crops and livestock and trade, which I know that you're all here to hear about, and also some components of the Farm Bill. And as the Deputy Secretary also mentioned, we are focused 100% on implementing the new Farm Bill at USDA. Let's start with the global economy. In January, the IMF projected slower economic growth for 2019 and 2020. That's the red line there, and it may not look like much on the screen, but it equals a loss in buying potential globally of about $700 billion over the next 4 years. About half of that will be in emerging economies. That forecast reflects weakening financial markets, uncertainty about trade policy, and concerns over China's economy. On the brighter side, our economy here in the United States remains strong, supported by expanded government spending, a strong labor market, and healthy consumer spending. Well, typically a strong U.S. economy will translate into a strong dollar, and that's what we've seen. But outside the U.S., financial markets in 2018 were volatile. The European Central Bank was thought likely to loosen monetary policy as Italy's national debt grows, and there was serious concern, and there still is, about the status of Venezuela weighing on currency markets. Within the last 6 months, that growth in dollar strength has slackened, though. The Brazilian real gained strength following their elections, The Japanese yen has gained in strength, mainly for investors seeking safe haven for currency, and the Argentine peso has gained since September after anti-inflation measures were implemented in Argentina. So we know a growing U.S. economy will help farm household income, but we also know that low commodity prices will weigh on farm income, and that's what we've seen since 2013. Our current expectation for the 2018 net farm income is $66 billion, and that's a long way from the $134 billion that we saw back in 2013. Looking forward over the next 10 years, we know that net farm income, or we expect net farm income, to rise slightly from the current level, but we do expect it to remain below $80 billion annually over the next 10 years. Let's look at the equity for a second. As farm income has fallen, farm equity has also come down, but you'll notice in the green line there, it's only come down slightly, about 5% over the last couple of years. It's been quite stabilized by persistently high land values. So while farm income has come down significantly, farm equity has remained relatively strong at very high levels historically. Turning to the credit situation, we've seen working capital fall by about 70% since 2012. That's causing producers' resources to be stretched. Farmers have increasingly tapped into that real estate equity to provide operating loans. And today, total debt is approaching record levels in real terms, and real estate debt reached a record high last year. However, overall measures of financial solvency remain firm, underscored by the high land values and low interest rates that we have today. The debt-to-asset ratio remains low, still under 15% for the sector, compared to more than 20% in the mid-1980s. Debt financing, though, has been rising, reaching 25% of net farm income in 2018. So you can see that red line inching upwards is something that we're paying close attention to. Now, we're still a long way from the peak of 60% in 1983, but the growing share of farmers' cash receipts that goes to financing debt is likely to cause cash flow problems for producers without significant land equity. It is clear from recent articles that the farm crisis from 3 decades ago still carries relevance. However, today, there's a couple things different compared to back then. Today, both interest rates and inflation remain low, and that helps maintain farmland values. The fixed-term debt today has generally replaced the variable rate debt of the 1980s, and banks and farms entered this downturn in a much more healthy financial condition. If we look at bankruptcy rates, and there's a lot going on in this chart, so I'll go slowly here. Nationally, the rate of bankruptcy remains quite low, sitting at 2.35 bankruptcies per 10,000 farms. That's 10 times lower the rate of bankruptcy in the 1980s. Now, we've seen some articles out there that have pointed out that some states in 2018 have shown higher rates than previously, and that's shown here for those farms sitting underneath that red line. Bankruptcy rates in those states is higher in 2018 than the 10-year average for that state. So let's look real fast at Wisconsin. We can see that the number of bankruptcies per 10,000 farms in Wisconsin reached 7 in 2018. Now that is up, but it's up from an average of about 5 over the last 10 years, 5 per 10,000. So again, the national rate is low historically, 2.35 per 10,000. And while we do have differences amongst states, none of them are approaching the levels that we saw back in the 1980s. Some states have had fewer bankruptcies in 2018 compared to the 10-year average. Consider California. California had about 2.5 bankruptcies in 2018 per 10,000 farms, compared to a 10-year average of 5 bankruptcies per 10,000 farms. So it's good to put this in context and not to get too over-focused on bankruptcy rates. But based on the economic uncertainty we've seen this year, one might suspect that the level of optimism out there in farm country, as well as in other parts of the economy, would have been volatile as well. And I've tried to show this a little bit by this red line. That's the CME Purdue Index of farmer optimism for economic opportunities over the next 6 months. That's been up and down all year. Currently, farmer optimism measured by that index is up 6.5% compared to this time last year. I noted last year when I showed this that it typically follows corn prices, and that's indeed what has happened this past year. As corn prices have gone up and down, so has optimism for economic outlook. But regarding the broader economy, there seems to be less optimism at this point amongst other market participants. Consumer sentiment is down, Main Street business optimism is down, and home builder optimism is down. Although I saw recently a Gallup poll that indicates that consumer sentiment may be higher than this is reflected in the Michigan Sentiment Index. All right, let's turn to the U.S. crop forecast. Beyond general economic conditions, there are several additional uncertainties this year that have a direct impact on the outlook for crops, livestock, and dairy. There are questions about trade, policy, weather, market information. All of these have an impact, of course, on what farmers are planning to do this coming year. It makes the outlook less certain than perhaps any time since the first year of the Freedom to Farm Act in 1996. I'll just know that in tomorrow's commodity sessions, our analysts will offer a detailed look at USDA balance sheets for the new crop year, updating our earlier projections that we put out last fall. Over the next 10 years, we still expect the general trend to continue of declines in agricultural prices, real prices over the next, next 10 years, as I mentioned, when you account for inflation. Of course, prices will go up, but in real terms, we expect them to fall. And what does that due to? Well, essentially, production is growing faster than global demand. The remarkable increases we've seen in agricultural productivity have led to falling real prices for commodities over the past half century. Consider soybeans. Since 1960, soybean production has increased by more than 1,000%, while soybean prices have fallen by more than 50%. Corn production has grown by more than 400%, and prices have fallen by nearly 60%. Record production has boosted global stocks relative to demand, as measured in days of use here, for several commodities to levels seen 20 years ago. So we saw a growth following the 2012 drought in stocks relative to use when it hit a low point. But we have recently seen tightening markets for corn and wheat. And over the next decade, we expect tightening supply conditions in corn and soybeans, where global consumption growth is expected to outpace supplies and support prices. Now we know stocks affect prices, but tariffs also affect prices. Here we see from last year that soybean prices, which had been strong going into the summer, deteriorated by about 20% following the escalation of the trade dispute. I'll note at the same time we were heading into the development of a record crop too, which also contributed to the price movement. But if we compare it to Brazil's price, we can see that the China's retaliatory tariff effectively blocked U.S. soybean imports, forcing U.S. soybeans to sell at steep discounts in other markets relative to our main competitor, Brazil. That discount to Brazilian soybeans reached nearly $100 per metric ton in October, while narrowing recently. While the low U.S. soybean prices did boost sales in other countries, and that's shown by those green arrows pointing upwards, the marketing of this year's crop has fallen far behind normal marketing progress. Currently, we've exported about 24 million metric tons of soybeans, and that's down about 13.5 million metric tons compared to where we were last year. That's the red arrow on the left. Exports to China alone have plummeted by 22 million metric tons compared to last year, or over 90%. As I mentioned, sales to some other countries are up due to the discount available on U.S. soybeans, but not by as much as we've lost to China. As a result, we're storing more soybeans and for longer periods. Stocks on December 1st were at 3.74 billion bushels, with a record 1.94 billion bushels being held on farm. carryout stocks this year are expected to grow to a record 910 million bushels, which will take several years to unwind. That's shown here as we show our projected carryout stocks over the next 10 years. At the time of the tariffs, the retaliatory tariffs were put in place, stocks to use was at 10% at the time, and now we've seen them jump to nearly 23%. As a result, our current estimates show that prices for soybeans are likely to take until the 2020 crop year to recover compared to what we estimated last year. That loss in revenue between the two projections, last year versus this year, totals approximately $8 billion. All right, now we'll get to the slides that you guys really came to see. So expanding stocks of wheat and soybeans and tightening global corn stocks will influence the outlook for area and prices in the coming crop season. Soybean prices are expected to rise modestly despite the tariffs, up 20 cents a bushel to $8.80 per bushel. Corn is expected up a nickel to $3.65 a bushel, a second year of price increases as carryout stocks are expected to continue their tightening. And wheat prices are expected up a nickel as well to $5.20 a bushel. Not a large increase, but significantly up from the $4 per bushel prices we saw a couple years ago. We do see cotton prices expected to fall slightly down to 67 cents a pound, and the wheat all rice price is expected up slightly to $12.20 per hundredweight. Producers, of course, will base their planning decisions not just on prices, but on relative prices and expected revenues. As a result of the price of soybeans relative to corn, we expect soybean area to fall by 4.2 million acres to 85 million acres. The three-crop total, corn, soybeans, and wheat for 2019-20 is expected to contract modestly, falling from 226.1 million acres to 224 million acres. All wheat acres are expected to be down at 47 million acres following excessive precipitation during winter plantings. Winter wheat plantings, that is. Corn is expected to gain almost 3 million acres, up to 92 million acres. That's the largest since 2016. And cotton area is expected to increase modestly to 14.3 million acres. That's all cotton. And rice area is expected to contract based on growth in stocks to use that I showed earlier, contracting to 2.7 million acres in the United States. Well, feed prices during 2019 are expected to reflect that divergence in price movements between corn and soybean meal. Corn prices, as I mentioned, are forecast higher for both the 2018-19 year as well as the 2019-20 year. But lower forecasts for soybean meal prices in 2019 are expected to help offset those higher corn prices. I'll just point out this is a similar slide to what I usually show for crops, but as with crop production, animal production over the long run is also characterized by amazing productivity and increased production with subsequent declines in real prices. Over the past half century, beef, pork, milk, and chicken prices have fallen by more than 50%, and output in the United States has more than doubled. We would expect that trend to continue over the next 10 years, particularly with new advances in biotech, as we'll discuss in our plenary panel later this morning. However, like the outlook for livestock products is also subject to supply shocks like African swine fever. Multiple outbreaks of the virus have been reported across China. African swine fever is not a threat to humans, but 100% lethal to pigs, and there is no vaccine for it. China, as you know, is the largest pig producer and has more than 400 million pigs, over half the world's supply. And further spread of ASF in China would lead to significant culling and further reductions in pork production. That may be in part to explain why U.S. hog prices jumped significantly following the news of the ASF outbreaks in China, which had followed several months of price weakness following trade tensions. Recently, we've seen supply pressures again pushing down on hog futures. While growth in production will likely continue, we see a mixed outlook for prices this year for livestock and dairy. Fed steer prices are forecast to settle up slightly, about a 1.2% year over year, supported by solid demand. Hog prices are expected to fall 7.5% from last year under an expansion of production. Prices for broilers are expected to settle at $97 per hundredweight or 97 cents a pound as production expands modestly in 2019. Milk prices are expected to rise 6.5% this year to more than $17 per hundredweight. And we'd note that with milk prices rising more than feed prices are, margins are expected to improve modestly into 2019. So we see all these circles here to the right showing that total meat and poultry production will hit records this year in 2019 of nearly 105 billion pounds. Milk production is also projected to expand to more than 220 billion pounds in 2019 with modest herd expansion to more than 9.4 million cows and growth in milk per cow. So turn to the trade outlook. With growing production in the United States, it is clear that trade will remain vital to maintaining farm income. But of course there are many countries willing to compete for those sales, as shown by the ship at a COFCO terminal filling up with soybeans in Argentina last year. Overall, U.S. exports are forecast at $141.5 billion in fiscal 2019. That's down $1.9 billion from 2018. The share of total U.S. ag exports to China is projected to be 6% only this year, down sharply from recent years. That's the yellow line there, with China falling from the top marketing country in 2017 to the 5th marketing country this year. Sales to other countries, including Canada, Mexico, and the EU, are expected to increase in 2019 and offset some of those reductions, as we saw with the soybean trade chart earlier. Looking at the longer-term forecast, USDA projects ag exports to continue to grow over the next 10 years. International demand for livestock products continues to be fueled by rising per capita income in emerging markets. Significant growth is forecast for meat and dairy exports over the next 10 years. Pork exports are expected to reach nearly 7 billion pounds, chicken exports to 8 billion pounds, and beef exports of nearly 3 billion pounds over the next 10 years. Dairy skim solid exports are expected to exceed 50 billion pounds by 2028. Let's turn to crops. We know that rising global population and income are also expected to drive growth in feed demand, thus supporting increased U.S. soybean and corn exports. In the case of soybeans, the continuation of retaliatory tariffs is assumed here and leads to slower growth in soybean exports, but still expected to rise to 61 million metric tons by 2028. Over the next 10 years, the U.S. share of global corn and soybean exports is expected to fall to 36 and 31% respectively. That's down roughly 6 percentage points lower than the 2017 share. Similarly, U.S. wheat exports are relatively flat over the projection period due to increased competition. Success in the 700-plus billion global marketplace will depend in part on access to key markets. In 2017, U.S. ag exports to the top 5 markets totaled $83 billion. Now, there are trade agreements, as we mentioned earlier today, are expected to boost that market share. But we've also seen a proliferation of trade agreements amongst our top trading partners, and we may hear about that today too or tomorrow. That has the potential to crowd out exports from the U.S. without similar or parallel bilateral agreements with the U.S. Our own agreements, such as the USMCA and new negotiations notified with Japan, the EU, and the UK, should help with that. But better access to customers in emerging markets in Southeast Asia, Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East remain crucially important to expanding U.S. exports as well. Taking a closer look at USMCA, we can see the importance of the North American market for U.S. agriculture, with more than $2.5 billion of corn, $1.5 billion of soybeans and pork headed south. USMCA maintains duty-free access to Canada and Mexico and expands our access to Canada's dairy and poultry markets. USMCA addresses ag biotech, geographic indications, non-tariff measures, and grading standards. It eliminates Canadian milk price classes 6 and 7 and sets disciplines on future pricing of skim milk solids. Implementation will take some time to complete, but USMCA will modernize and strengthen food and agricultural trade in North America once it's complete. So we can see some of the next steps here listed on the slide. Now, I noted earlier that there are a number of policy changes in 2018 setting the stage for U.S. producers in 2019. New Farm Bill, new renewable fuels policies, new regulations, new farm programs to address hurricane and wildfire disasters. But today, let's look at the Farm Bill. On December 20th, President Trump signed the Agricultural Improvement Act of 2018. The new Farm Bill is expected to cost $428 billion over the next 5 years, slightly higher than the cost of continuing the 2014 Farm Bill. The nutrition title is expected to cost $326 billion over 5 years. That's roughly 76% of the total Farm Bill expenditures. Crop insurance programs are expected to cost $38 billion over 5 years. Commodity programs are expected to cost $31.4 billion over 5 years, and conservation programs are expected to cost $29.3 billion over 5 years. In total, farmers and ranchers are expected to receive almost $20 billion per year, and that is about equal to 5% of their annual value of crops and livestock that they produce. Now, this Farm Bill follows along with the trend that we've seen over the past Farm Bills. We're moving from reliance on programs that controlled how much and what producers could plant and produce to programs that let producers make decisions based on market signals. The recent uptick in FY19 noted here represents expected payments made to producers under the Market Facilitation Program, intended to offset costs associated with disrupted markets. In addition, this includes assistance under the WIP program to deal with the 2017 hurricanes. Let's look real close at Title I for a minute. We can see that Congress rebalanced base acre payments with a significant drop in expected peanut payments on peanut base acres, but an increase in rice base payments and an addition of seed cotton payments. Of course, the generic base acres were eliminated as part of the earlier Bipartisan Budget Act of 2018 and replaced most of those generic acres with seed cotton base acres. Both corn and soybean base acre payments ticked up slightly, while wheat base acre payments fell slightly. However, the change in some of those payments is driven not just by the Farm Bill, but by changes in price projections that we've seen between June of 2017 and January of 2019. Another big focus of the Farm Bill was on dairy. The new Farm Bill established new parameters for the dairy program. Tight margins in the dairy sector have led to steady consolidation of herds over the past 15 years. Overall, the dairy herd has grown to about 9.4 million cows, while the number of licensed operations has fallen from 70,000 in 2003 to just 40,000 in 2017. As a result, the median dairy herd size was 900 cows in 2012, up from 570 in 2007 and 275 in 2002. Now, that growth is remarkable, and I would expect that the new agricultural census to be released on April 11th will show continued growth in the median herd size. I don't know where Hubert is. He's out here somewhere, so you can find him and ask him more about the agricultural census. Unfortunately, due to some of the delays, we're not able to release those numbers today, but we will in about a little over a month's time. Let's look at the new program for that median dairy herd of 900 cows and about 20 million pounds of production. We can see that participation in the new program, Dairy Margin Coverage, DMC, at the highest margin available will cost less and pay out more often than the old Margin Protection Program, or MPP. Now, this is assuming the last 5 years of margin history. Dairy producers will be able to cover production history up to 5 million pounds at the new $9.50 per hundredweight margin, with much lower premiums than before. Of course, $9.50 wasn't available before. That's roughly the equivalent, 5 million pounds is roughly the equivalent of production from 230 cows. So that illustrates why this new program may be particularly beneficial for smaller producers. In addition, producers will be able to participate in the crop insurance programs as well. Both LGM Dairy as well as the new DRP program, Dairy Revenue Protection Program, and crop insurance are available to producers to enroll their production history in as well as participating in the new DMC program. All right, I'm going to wrap it up here soon, but I just wanted to return to the theme of the forum, growing locally and selling globally. I wanted to highlight that despite difficult financial times for many producers, the American farmer is producing and selling an enormous amount of food that feeds people not just in the United States but globally. Oftentimes we hear about how the American farmer is feeding the 300 million people in the United States, but I think it's worth mentioning how many people we're feeding abroad as well. In 2017, the U.S. sold $9 billion worth of corn and $22 billion of soybeans to customers abroad. That accounts for more than a third of the total corn and soybean exports globally. The U.S. is the world's #1 beef producer and the third largest beef exporter in volume terms, but it's the top exporter in value terms. And you can see some of the other commodities listed here. In general, the U.S. is either the first or second largest exporter for these top commodities: pork, beef, cotton, soybeans, wheat, and corn. Ultimately, what does that mean? Well, we're not the only country with expectations of productivity growth and export market expansion. South America continues to expand production of oilseeds and corn. We know that. Russia and Ukraine have rapidly expanded their production of wheat, corn, and other grains, and they're out there actively seeking to grab market share. Competitive prices resulting from that competition will motivate producers to be more efficient. And U.S. farmers have shown time and time again their resilience and their ability to innovate and compete globally. And ultimately, we expect more people to have improved access to food in the coming 10 years as real prices fall and global growth continues to boost purchasing power. That's shown here in this most recent report on food security from USDA's Economic Research Service that notes that in 2018, approximately 21.1% of the world's population was considered food insecure. But over the next 10 years, that share is expected to fall despite growing population. And by 2028, the expectation is that only 10.4% of the world's population will be food insecure. A remarkable decline, nevertheless, still plenty of work to be done. What do these numbers mean? Well, as I mentioned earlier, we expect people to have improved access to food in the coming 10 years as real food prices fall, as we saw earlier, and global growth continues to boost purchasing power. That means expanding markets for U.S. producers and more opportunities to grow and sell globally. And with that, I am going to stop and say thank you very much. I appreciate you sticking with me through all the slides, and we are getting ready to welcome our keynote speakers here in just a second. Thanks very much, everyone.
Good morning, everyone. And Rob, congratulations. Your weather forecasting is impeccable. You didn't choose yesterday morning to have this. So we're glad that all of you are here safely, and we want to say welcome. We are looking forward to a great Outlook Forum and appreciate you all's attendance here. Obviously, from the farm to the table, agriculture is a big deal in all of our nations and all around the world. It impacts business and industry and every family on the planet here. So this Outlook Forum is a vital planning tool used by all of us that deal in the whole food chain, and from producers to processors to logistics to many other industries as well. So we're glad to have you here. I want to introduce some special friends and guests here with us today. A special welcome to the Minister of Agriculture from our neighbor to the north, Minister Lawrence McCauley, right here. Lawrence, welcome. Our friends to the south, represented by Secretary of Agriculture, Victor Villalobos. So, Victor Villalobos. We are also happy to have today two ambassadors with us. Mexico's ambassador to the United States, Ambassador Barcena, here this morning. And our ambassador to Canada, Ambassador Kraft, with us as well. So thank you all. We had dinner last night with our really first trilateral get-together, and it was a great and warm, casual conversation, and really among friends and family that you would expect. And that's what I think I probably first heard this from Lawrence Macaulay, and I think it comes together so true, and you see the relationship, and you'll get to observe it today a little bit of the familial and the friendship relationship between the three nations, but we've deemed it the best neighborhood on earth, and I think in North America, and we're delighted to be here with our friends today. I want to talk about a different topic here today that you may be expecting. We're going to talk about, you'll have a lot of information from Rob and his economist and others and our undersecretaries about outlooks and what we expect in agriculture. But I want to talk about something that I think may be an issue that we're going to have to deal more and more with in the future. And our agricultural research and education and extension infrastructure here in the United States, I believe it's revered and emulated around the world. I think it's really a key component there. I think it's contributed to the development of tools including biotech and other progressive types of technologies dealing with a better, more efficient production of the food and fuel and fiber around the world. As leaders in agriculture, I think our job is to ensure that our producers, farmers, ranchers, others, foresters, all of these, have the proven tools to sustainably produce safe and nutritious and affordable food. That's really why we're all come together, and to secure fair access to the global marketplace. And that's why we are coming together in North America. So our farmers and ranchers in all of our countries can determine what best tools and technologies fit their own individual needs and choose those. So in the next 31 years, you know the statistics better than I do. You know the challenge of continuing to feed a growing and hungry world. World's population projected 9.7 billion people in just 31 years. And look at the data. That means that we've got to double the production of food, feed, fiber, and to do so sustainably while we protect our planet with limited inputs and obviously not making any more land. So productivity growth over the last 70 years in agriculture has been phenomenal, and it's been important in our ability to continue to feed growing populations around the world. But we also recognize the trends are not continuing that trajectory regarding those types of productivity growths. So we need all the tools in the toolbox to meet the challenge of feeding everyone into the future. So I want to bring to your attention that something that I'm becoming more concerned about, and a movement that tells consumers that they need to fear their food because of the use of technologies, both old and new, in agriculture and the food system. This growing fear has the potential to sideline, deter critical technologies that we already use and derail technologies in the pipeline that we already know how to achieve. I want to challenge us as leaders of agriculture in the whole supply chain, whether it be from the research to the production to the processing to the retailer. I want to challenge all of us to join me in advocating for agriculture and to fight the fear your food movement here. I want you to join me in telling our stories. I tell producers all over the country, I don't think they have anything to be ashamed or embarrassed about what they've done in the history. I want to talk about our commitment and practice to ensure food and environmental safety and stewardship of the land going forward. We need to help inform non-farmers, understand that crop protection tools and these technologies help to feed the world and will be needed more in the future. Crop protection tools allow farmers to grow stronger, healthier, and more productive crops. These tools are tested, inspected, retested, studied, and then tested multiple times again. For example, our own Environmental Protection Agency follows a rigorous science-based standard for regulating pesticides used in food production. They begin with an exposure level determined to pose no risk of adverse effects to consumers. Then they make the standard 10 times 1,000 times stricter to secure an extra margin of safety in any of those products. USDA's own Agricultural Marketing Service runs the Pesticide Data Program, which is an annual survey of detectable pesticide residues on foods available to American consumers. Here are the facts. In the most recent survey in 2017, more than 99% of sample items had pesticide residues that did not exceed any of the EPA standards and balances and tolerances, and more than half had no detectable pesticide residue at all. Other technologies, like bioengineered plants that naturally defend against pests, have contributed to a decline in the need for some agricultural crop protection chemicals and pesticides. These examples of biotechnology products have a proven safety record. After 30 years of commercial use, there is still no credible scientific information or evidence of harm to humans or livestock. In fact, nearly 1,300 food safety decisions on biotech crops have been made by regulatory agencies across 28 countries, including the European Union. All confirm the safety of these products. These regulatory decisions are supported by hundreds of studies, including those funded by the EU. Yet misinformation becomes prevalent, and which leads to bad policy. For example, the Food Safety Agency in the EU determined biotech crops to be safe for human and animal consumption, and the EU continues to import biotech crops for animal food, yet the EU prohibits their own farmers from planting these biotech crops. The cost of information could be high in terms of human health and well-being. One noteworthy example is the development of golden rice. In 1999, you may remember, scientists developed a rice that produced a higher level of beta-carotene, or vitamin A, in the body. The deficiency of vitamin A, we knew, was especially deadly in the poorest nations in Africa and Southeast Asia. Later today, on this stage and in the breakout sessions, you will hear about new technologies to develop disease resistance in swine and cattle, and to address animal welfare concerns in livestock production, and to develop disease resistance in specialty crops. Will misinformation and unjustified regulatory hurdles derail these innovations? We should all be asking ourselves that question. What will our contribution be to supporting these innovations? And will we stand up as an industry, a broad industry, against the Fear Your Food movement? We in the agricultural community must take up this challenge to connect with the consumers that we ultimately serve. They deserve to know the facts. They deserve to know the truth. We need to be transparent because we have nothing to hide. We must get better at telling our own stories rather than letting others fill in the void. Consumers need the truth. Don't fear your food. Communication experts have repeatedly told us that the way to do battle with misinformation is to communicate. Go out and tell our stories about the real benefits of these technologies. In other words, don't fear your food. When consumers hear your stories, they connect at a human level and will come to trust your knowledge and the choices you make as farming and producer professionals. The three nations represented here this morning signed a trade agreement called the USMCA. One important aspect of this agreement is that for the first time, it specifically addressed agricultural biotechnologies to support 21st century innovations in agriculture. We agreed to provisions to enhance information exchange and cooperation on agricultural biotechnology trade-related matters. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's all of our responsibility to talk about what we do. If we're proven to be wrong, we need to correct it, and we need to move forward with not fearing our food. Today, I'm going to invite our friends from Mexico and Canada to the stage with me and allow Minister McCauley and Secretary Villalobos to address you, and then we're going to have a little fireside chat here just to show you how we can sit down and chat about our neighborhood. Thank you all very much. Speak.
What, do we speak here or?
Yeah, you can speak at the podium.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much, Sonny, our Secretary. And I'm certainly very pleased to be here with my two counterparts from the United States and Mexico. It's vitally important. Secretary Villalobos, it's one of our first meetings, not our first meetings, but again, it's so vitally important that we know each other, have a good rapport, and make sure that we're able to deal with issues as they come forward. Sonny mentioned that the trade deal was so important, and it's important to note, I think I'm speaking to people here that understand very well that over the past 25 years, trade has quadrupled in our countries. So it's important that we continue to do this and to make sure that we work together. There's a few things that have to be, of course, Sonny and I and Secretary Villalobos spoke about trade issues and steel and aluminum and the problem it's causing for us in the three countries, and hopefully that will be addressed. But it's so good to be with these people here and to make sure that we continue to work together. Because without a question, North America working together, supplying the food, as Secretary indicated, the population of the world is going to be close to 10 billion in 30 years time, so we have to feed this. I feel it's a moral obligation for us to make sure that we do that, and it takes technology to do that, as the Secretary indicated. And we have to make sure that the regulatory process is science-based, not fear, not voted on by politicians. It's science-based system that if it is safe, and we have the evidence to prove that it is safe. That's what we promote in Canada, and that's what I indicate when I speak worldwide. It's so important that we do that, because if we do not, we will not be able to feed the world in 30 years' time. Again, I feel it's a moral obligation. It's vitally important that we work together in North America. We're doing that. The new trade deal is vitally important for the economy of our three countries, very important to the people I'm looking at right ahead of me, and it's also, of course, very important for Canada. Pleasure to be here with my two colleagues. Thank you very much.
Mr. Secretary Perdue, dear Minister Macaulay, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to all. Thank you, Secretary Perdue, for your kind hospitality and for the opportunity to address this distinguished audience. Thank you for adding to your close friends and partners, Canada and Mexico, to the 95th USDA's Agriculture Outlook Forum. There is no better opportunity to revise where we stand on a global effort in agriculture and food production. I also want to thank Minister Macaulay for allowing me to share this forum with our wonderful host. Thank you also, USDA Deputy Secretary, Mr. Steve Censky, and USDA Chief Economist, Mr. Robert Johansson, for welcoming to this important event. Thank you all for being here today. Let me start my remarks on what Secretary Perdue tweeted during his visit to Mexico, and I quote, "Our approach to trade improves if we know history of our trading partners. This is a very important perspective in which our countries need to approach issues in a different way that has been in the past. We have the historic opportunity to extend our understanding, especially in the context of benefiting our rural communities. In recent years, the North America agri-food sectors have strengthened our complementary relationship, providing opportunities for many of our farmers and for many of our consumers. We all share that the spirit of a regional cooperation and partnership must be maintained to maximize the contribution of agriculture to the economic growth and to the development of rural communities, as well as to the expansion of scientific knowledge and innovation. The recent USMCA agreement proved once again our commitment to continue promoting a fair and open trade based on clear rules. Now it is up to us to look for the ways to make it a reality and to get the benefit, not just only for consumers, but to our farmers, especially our small and middle-scale farmers. President Andrés Manuel López Obrador arrives to the Mexican presidency with a great responsibility and with a strong mandate from the Mexican people to build better foundations to reestablish the economies of social policies by combating inequality, poverty and marginalization, violence and corruption. In our sector, we recognize that our agriculture is very diverse, with different structures, different condition systems, different agroclimatic and economic conditions, diverse farmers, age, gender, and culture, and each facing different challenges. So a single policy model is not enough to address all of these different needs. Our task is to tailor policies, make new institutions, to find a way to redesign our responsibilities to cover the gaps in all levels, giving priority to those who are much more vulnerable. We have a clear goal to combat these major gaps in development, especially in the southern region of our country. 51% Mexico's total population lives in poverty. This unacceptable figure, the result of an unequal economic growth, compels us to redirect all efforts to build new means of a real transformation so we can bring opportunities to a larger margin of marginalized rural population. President López Obrador has highlighted the development of a more effective mechanisms of two-way communication, not only from top to bottom, but also from the basis, from the origin, from farmers and ranchers, so their voices can be heard, so they can stop being ignored and voiceless in the agriculture sector. The structural challenges launched by President López Obrador, combating inequality, poverty, marginalization, violence, and corruption, will foster the potential to accelerate the development of quality integration, attract foreign investment, and boost productivity to stimulate economic growth. Our new agenda now includes, among other programs, initiatives aimed at introducing training programs for youth in agriculture, expanding domestic productivity support programs for small-scale farmers, implementing a model of inclusive rural financial systems, developing a well-defined rural extension service capable of complementing educational and agricultural research services, detonating organizational platforms of small-scale farmers, generating innovative, sustainable efforts to improve our coffee and cocoa plantation systems, among other many different crops, defining approaches to transform agricultural practices under the realities of changing climatic patterns, and restoring the environment, generating social cohesion and developing jobs in the southern states of Mexico. Mexico has planned a central dynamic support for food security and responsible investment in sustainable agriculture, particularly in our marginalized territories, where our priority is to keep creating rural employment, ensuring that food production remains attractive for new generations. Over the years, the United States, Canada, and Mexico have engaged in several crucial cooperation programs to protect plant and animal health, strengthen useful, satisfactory, and forecast systems, conduct joint research, and share best practices. These efforts have been helped to eradicate several pests and diseases from the region, improve data and exchange, and ensure the reliable supply of food chains that makes a North American agriculture safer and more competitive. Mexico will continue to promote agriculture development alongside with our American partners by supporting mechanisms that will allow our farmers and ranchers to level up our sanitary, phytosanitary, and food safety standards. For that, United States, Canada, and Mexico have a long history of cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, the challenges ahead are great, and it is important to face them alone as our closest allies. On this, allow me to again quote Secretary Perdue. We live in the best neighborhood of the world. Therefore, we must continue to work closely in an open dialogue and be prepared to go further in integrating our North American competitive bloc. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary Villalobos and Minister McCauley. And now we want to entertain some questions. It's going to be a dynamic answer. You all need to be very patient with Lawrence and me. We're authentic farmers. We're sitting here with a PhD-trained scientist, so we're going to defer all the tough questions to Secretary Villalobos. But it's good to be with you this morning, and I think you had a card on your seat if you want to text in the questions, and they'll be put to the screen with us, and we'll begin. And actually, the first question, Secretary, really has to do with some of your latter part of your comments about infectious diseases. Yes. And how we're working together. So the first question is, can the North American countries work together to protect their farmers and their agricultural industries from pests and infectious diseases such as African swine fever? So, go ahead.
Well, actually, thank you very much. I consider that our North American countries have built a very strong and complementary programs in order to protect and work together to address always a challenge, how to keep our agriculture free of all exotic diseases. So as long as we continue communicating and sharing technologies and recognizing our mechanisms that we develop in each of our country, we can be sure that we gradually will continue working to sustain our agriculture and protect it with, for other diseases and pests, as you mentioned. There are more and more risks because of the communication, because of the export of products, because of our trade. So we have to strengthen our relation, we have to strengthen our technical capabilities in order to be more prepared for that. And at the same time, we have to open our markets and we have to share our products with the rest of the world. So that also imply this risk. So I think as long as we continue working as we have been doing and recognizing our different mechanisms, then we will be more and more prepared to deal with them.
Thank you very much, Victor. And Sonny, it's an issue that I brought up to you more than once, and I'm very pleased that it's brought up here because I fully understand the devastation that can happen if this enters the North American market in any of our countries. The fact of the matter is we're shut out of our hog exports, and that would be disastrous. What I would like to see happen, and I would certainly work with my counterparts here, and in fact, we're having a symposium in Ottawa in April. What we want to do is sit down and put something together that will deal with this issue, not after it comes, but before it comes. What we want to do is be able to deal with it like TB or other issues that we face in agriculture. If we can isolate it and make sure it's done properly and it's contained, that's so vitally important. But it's a bigger issue than that, as my two friends are well aware here. We export to other countries, and they have to agree that that we have it confined. First of all, we have to get agreement that they will agree that we can confine it. But we have to realize that it's in China, it's in Vietnam, it's spreading right across Asia. This is a big issue, in my view, for the agricultural sector, and I just hope that we can deal with this issue not after it comes, but before it comes. Yes. In our country, we have dealt a lot with social media, we have dealt a lot with our airports, imports, increased our fines if you're caught with taking meat in from any other country. This type of thing is so vitally important because it takes one to cost us billions of dollars. And I just hope that we can work together, as I said before, not after, but before.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
As you've heard, our three countries have already been working together through here at USDA, our Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, and complementary organizations in each of our neighboring countries. And it's important that we communicate, as Lawrence said ahead of time, the protocols have to be very similar, what you do ahead of time. It's like emergency planning. And I kind of look at it, we've used this metaphor neighborhood several times this morning. I think it's kind of like neighborhood watch. You know, you have to design a program to watch out for your neighbors and guard there if you see something happening, and have standards of protection there that we all can agree upon. And as Lawrence said, we have to communicate what we're doing and our confinement protocols so that the rest of the world, our customers around the world, would know that they would be safe from us spreading these types of things. Obviously, Mr. McCauley mentioned the tremendous economic issues that would create among all of us. Sharing the long borders that we do both on the north and the south, it's important that we function together as one in these particular areas. African swine fever has the most press right now, but the pests will continue coming. As Secretary mentioned, the travel and the export and all the things that go on in a very mobile world today will only increase the likelihood of things transferring from one nation to the other. And but you do need to know that we are committed, we have been committed, we are committing even further based on the most recent African swine fever to up our game in neighborhood watch. So, next question. What is the timeline for the USMCA passage in your respective countries? I'm really going to defer to my friends on this.
Thank you very much, Sonny. Well, in our system, what takes place, you have to give notice to the House of Commons, and we have done that. And after that, it has to have 21 sitting days until we can put it on the order paper. And then it proceeds as any other piece of legislation does through the House of Commons. But of course, we're watching our two colleagues and our governments in North America as to how they proceed on this issue too. but noting that we fully understand the vital importance of this renewed NAFTA and what it does for our economy, what it does for North America, and what it does for agriculture. Actually, it's the envy of the world. And we're watched very closely worldwide
Sure.
as to what we have done and what we will continue to do. This will put billions of dollars into the pockets of farmers. And that's what I want to see happen. Thank you very much, Sonia.
Thank you. We also enjoy this process in terms of, even though that we have less than 3 months in the government, we are been working together with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, trade, agriculture, and different sectors. And we are working in a very collaborative way, providing information and learning this process is very educative for us. But at the same time, we have a different mechanism because it will go to the Senate, and that's where the decision will take. And we hope that that can be taken hopefully soon.
I think appropriately, while the three leaders of our nations negotiated these final deals, it's certainly appropriate for our legislative bodies in all of each country to have a ratification opportunity here. We're moving as expeditiously as possible. We have similar timelines that Minister McCauley described, and you know that we've notified through the U.S. Trade Ambassador, Congress, and then they will have an opportunity to discuss that. We are working individually and corporately on the Capitol Hill, explaining all the provisions that any of our members of Congress have questions regarding. And I'm cautiously optimistic that they will view this, again, from a renewal of a situation that we feel like benefited all three of our countries to do that. That doesn't say it's never over till it's over in any type of legislation, but I think, again, from one nation to the other, will build momentum as each nation ratifies there, and hopefully we can have this, I would hope, certainly by, I'm always optimistic, by summer. Next question. New technology in ag production is critical for producers, but technology faces regulatory and consumer acceptance challenges. How can we work together in this? Someone listened to my remarks, I guess, so thank you for the question. And I think, again, let's talk about how we can work together. Lawrence mentioned science-based data, science-based policy, and rather than emotion-based policy. So do you have practical examples? What I think we're doing with the USMCA and the new agreement for the first time on biotechnology, I think helps us develop and maybe even lead the world in international standards regarding science-based technologies. So what do you think we can do? What more can we do, Lawrence?
Thank you very much, Sonny. And first of all, as I said when I spoke, I didn't speak very long, but the fact of the matter is the science-based regulatory system is vitally important. And I don't view scientists making a decision and voting on it in a legislature. Victor is a scientist. I'm not. I should not vote on it. We need the science-based regulatory system. That means the food is safe. Without a question, in our country, our CFIA certifies any exports that we have. Basically, it's well respected worldwide. It's vitally important that we fund these institutions to make sure. In my view, what we have to do, and I try to do it to the best of my ability, is to make sure when I speak worldwide, is to indicate that we promote strongly the science-based regulatory system, because as Sonny mentioned when he spoke, there's going to be just under 10 billion people on this planet. We have to feed them. That has to be done using all the technology that we have, all the means that we have. And we cannot decide that we're not going to use something because somebody thinks it's bad. I have great difficulty with that. The fact is, we have to push strong the science-based system. I grew potatoes and milk cows in Prince Edward Island. And I remember when I was a kid, I was one time, it was, if you grew 300 bushel to the acre, that was a good crop. Today, if you don't grow 400 or 500 hundredweight to the acre, it's not a good crop. That didn't just happen. That takes investment. That takes new technology. That takes everything. If we're going to feed the world, that's what you have to do. That's what I want to promote, and I'm sure my two colleagues here want to promote the same thing. I think it's a moral obligation to do so. Thank you, Sonny.
Yes, I would like to say that we are not going to be able to meet the challenge to feed the world if we are not properly apply the science, technology, and innovation. So we have to produce more with the same land, as you mentioned. We have to do it in a proper way. We have to make a proper use of the natural resources like water and make a proper use of soils. And if we don't do that, if we don't apply the technology then and the instruments that we already have, again, we will not be able to meet the big challenge to produce more for the increasing population. So I'm pleased to say that we have an arsenal of technologies that can help us and can accompany this process to produce and be more efficient in production. So regulation is important, but we have to be careful because not to over-regulate, and also to be careful to be able to use the proper instruments and again be able to apply properly in order to meet those challenges. I'm confident, and this is my view, that we, with all these technologies that are coming, the new weight of science applied for agriculture will help us to meet this challenge, to be more efficient in production, produce more and in a safe way, and with that instruments, we can certainly produce enough food for the increasing population. So I'm confident on that.
I think part of the good news of this is just like infectious diseases, transmissible infectious diseases, our countries are already working on this. We've got international standards like OIE and others, and you led one of those international standard organizations at one time. So our scientist here has a lot of experience in how we do this from an international perspective, and we in this great neighborhood lead the way for our international partners to accept those international standards, participating in a world fashion to do that. I think, again, what Lawrence is saying, what I tried to say at the podium was, we need these decisions based on sound, replicatable science decisions, not political science.
Sure.
I couldn't agree more, Sonny. And the fact is, farmers take care of the land. They can do that. Farmers and ranchers are the best stewards of the land, and we always say that.
Yes.
Okay, the next question is, y'all are doing good. Exports are critical for farmers in North America. Where can these countries, three countries, work together to open new markets, particularly in Asia? Where can the three countries work together to open new markets, practically or particularly in Asia? I used an example earlier this morning when we were talking before we came out. I view this kind of export competitiveness between all of us similar to what I did when I was governor of Georgia, in that while we competed against Alabama for economic development, North Carolina, Tennessee, South Carolina, Florida, all of our neighbors, we competed against for specific projects, but we were always pulling for the region. And I think that's really the situation we have here. Obviously, Mexico can produce some things that the U.S. doesn't. Canada can do some things that the U.S. does not. We can do some things there. So I think the very essence of trade is looking at where we are the low-cost producer and accepting that, benefiting from that, and working together, again, in these standards from opening up markets that may not be as open as we would like. We mentioned some last night that we have some frustrations about internationally, how we can help them to understand the safety, the efficacy of the food products and the that we send them. So that again is a common goal from helping our customers around the world, particularly in Asia and Africa, where our products are vastly needed, how we can help them understand the products of North America are healthy and safe. Lawrence, what
Thank
are you
you.
going to do?
Thank you, Sonny. I think a prime example is what happened here yesterday. Being a Canadian, it's kind of comical, really. Everything shut down in Washington because there was a flake of snow. I can tell you, where I come from, if we shut down for a flake of snow, we'd be shut down half the year. But anyhow, which means that we produce different products in different parts of North America. We use sometimes the hamburger. We can grow the wheat. You can make the flour. You can produce the Americans can, of course, produce the beef, and the lettuce and tomatoes, of course, can come from Mexico this time of year. And we need that analogy with working together. Sure, we compete some, but the fact is, working together, we're much stronger. We're much stronger in using and promoting what we feel is right. And not feel it's right, we know it's right. To make sure that we know that what we are promoting is good quality, safe food. And we all know how vitally important that is because of issues that took place worldwide in other countries, in the Asian community in particular. So I think that we have to work together, make sure that we combine our efforts, and to also make sure that we have the proper regulatory process in their country so that that countries feel very confident that when they eat food from North America, they know it's safe. It's interesting, some countries in the world, I was in Vancouver and I noticed this pallet of material. It came from another country in Asia and was going back. And I asked them why. It was actually made in the country and going back to the country. But they felt if it came from our country, it was safe to use. So it's important that we use that, to make sure that we use that working together, to make sure that we promote. We're going to compete sometimes, but let's get her opened up first. Let's make sure that our products are sold over there. And also, on the first question, to make sure we continue to keep what we got.
Sure. Yeah, I fully agree with what you just mentioned. And if we consider North America as an integrated market, means Canada, United States, and Mexico, then we can certainly be more prepared to address international markets in a better way. In fact, that's what's happened. We have more and more integrated trade and production among our countries. So not just only that we can produce different kind of crops in our countries, but also we can do it in contra-cycle when we can expand our offer of specific products because of the different weather conditions in our country. So I think we are, if we look at from the perspective of an integrated market, then we can be certainly more strong, more efficient in address these Asian markets and others. And I agree, and as we just mentioned what Sonny related to food safe and integrated pest mechanisms to control diseases. So certainly we can not just only produce enough food to other markets, but also with a very reliable mechanism of innocuity and safe of our products.
I think if we're going to be successful operating as a neighborhood, these questions build on one another. We have to be good about controlling infectious diseases across our border. We have to have standards of safety and health in that way and brand that. We really will share one another's reputation, how well we do that.
Yeah.
It's somewhat like I told my 4 children when I was elected to go to Atlanta to the legislature. I said, you know, whether you like it or not, we share one another's reputation. You can go to school and make me embarrassed to go to Atlanta, or I can go to Atlanta and make you embarrassed to go to school. So we share one of those reputations among our nations in that regard. So it's very important. Lawrence, if you think it's bad about shutting down for snow, you should have been here when we shut down for wind. Okay. Steel and aluminum tariffs have led to tariffs on U.S. agricultural products. Will they come off soon? I think all of us in agreement, we would love for that to happen. I think, again, the expectation of a completed USMCA agreement would lead to that. I think that was an appropriate expectation in that way. And while we are not in charge of that necessarily, I think it's in all, we recognize from our industry and our sectors, it's in all of our best interest to see that happen. So we've had conversations about that. We're working toward that end, obviously, to remove those tariffs over steel and aluminum that are impacting our nations together. And I think the sooner we can do that, the better we can fully utilize the agreement that's been made through the USMCA agreement. So you all are welcome to comment if you want, or just say amen.
Sonny, I appreciate what you said. And being a free trading nation, we see any tariffs as causing difficulty and economic problems. And of course, as you stated, it will bring to a conclusion to a very important trade deal, without a question, vitally important. Thank you. We need steel and aluminum tariffs off.
Yes.
Rural communities in North America face challenges in raising the next generation of farmers. How can we work to help our farmers continue to feed the world? I want to ask you, Secretary, to begin to address this, because you talked about the demographics of your population.
Yes.
And your new president's desire and aspiration to lift up that poverty level. Obviously, that's important for all of us. All of us have certain sectors. You have certainly probably the significant portion of that way. And
Yes.
so tell us what you think we as governments can do. And maybe this may be more specific to our individual nations, but we all recognize the challenge of bringing in the next generation. We also know the demographic data on the aging of our farmers as well.
Yes. Well, as I mentioned, we have a large population of our society live in poverty, and the poorest people lives in the rural and indigenous land. So, and that's been ignored for many years, and we have to recognize that there is the need to bring them to a better standard of living. So while we don't recognize that, there is this imbalance in between how the people living in the rural, remote areas always wants to have a better conditions of life. So we are now, with new policies, we are bringing capacities, we are bringing knowledge, and we are bringing through extension service possibilities for them to overcome this situation. So that's a major program in which we are engaged now. And that's, we recognize that will somehow interest of young people to remain in the rural areas and be able to get engaged in the production schemes that we are going to develop. And we recognize that that will also help us to avoid migration, that people are looking, young people particularly, are looking for opportunities in the cities, and they are not capable, they are not with the capacity to be integrated properly in cities or try to go to another places. So it is very important, and we think that this social problem needs to be attacked, needs to be solved in where this originated, which is in the rural area. So bringing opportunities to the young people, bringing technology, bringing a small package of knowledge through extension service will make them hopefully with the interest and the possibility to make their living, better living in the rural areas. Otherwise, we will continue with the problems associated with insecurity and violence. So it is the origin of the problem, and it is how to be attacked, how to be addressed in where it is originated. And that means rural, new possibilities, bringing new options for them to raise their income and standard of living. So that's the major, I would say, mean of how we can address this social problem in the rural areas.
Thank you, Sonny. Victor, I fully agree with you, and of course, in each country you have different problems. Well, we just appointed a Minister of Rural and Economic Development, which is vitally important, and Victor's right, and for sure, if the quality of life is better in an urban area, that's what's going to happen. What we have to do is make sure that the first thing I think we have to do is make sure they're connected. Like we announced $1 billion to make sure in broadband and this type of thing. They have to be connected. You cannot attract business or anything else unless that's done. That's what we are, and we are also investing more in interest in people young people to be involved more in farmers. You don't need people like me on farms, you need young people on farms. That's what must take place. We're working very hard in our country to make sure that that happens. But we have to make, in my view, and the view of people that I talk to, is that the quality of life has to be as good. Now, there are qualities in a rural area that you do not find in an urban area. Sure. But being disconnected and the problems that we have, we must make sure that we address them. And governments can look at government investments in certain areas because you can do things in a rural area, anything at all. I mean, major companies can, if they can access the world, they can be in rural areas. And this creates a nucleus in the rural areas, and then there's something there. There has to be something there in order to make sure that we can keep and attract people to the rural areas. That's what we're trying to do in our countries, but I think it's a worldwide problem. Mm-hmm. But we're working very hard to address that problem, and we'll take any advice that anybody has in order to make sure that we do a better job of it. We know we need to do it. Thank you very much, Senator.
Well, it's certainly a challenge here in the United States. As we know, the rural-urban divide seems to be gaining more diversion there, which I think is a challenge for the nation as a whole, possibly leading to social unrest in many ways. You mentioned something that we're really focusing on, which I believe is really one of the potentially transformative issues in this space, and that's connectivity, being particularly the 21st century connectivity of broadband and data. To be able, farmers are early adopters, they're very entrepreneurial, they're very creative. If they can have access to the world market through electronics, then they can create a lot of those jobs there and a lot of those products there, as well as you're not going to find major companies are going to places where they cannot have connectivity. It's we say we electrified this country in probably the 1930s, or began that way, and this is the electrification challenge of the 21st century. Sure. And if we're going to stem the tide of rural urban divide, I think it's imperative that we begin to invest enough, focus our investments, build partnerships, both public and private, local, state, and federal, in order to get this done. Okay, next question. As the world population grows over the next few decades, what do you foresee as the biggest challenges? Increased production or the cost of production?
Thank you very much, son.
Good answer.
I think both are a problem. We have to increase the production, but without a question, our farmers can do that if we give them the opportunity. We have to invest in technology. We have to invest in innovation. We have to invest in science. We have to create the seeds that use less water, less fertilizer, create more profitability. As I said, when I grew potatoes, when I was a small kid, years ago, it's doubled what you have to produce now. It has to continue on that. That's what we have to do to make sure that we're able to. And then in genetics in animals, and just there's no end to what we can do and should do in order to make sure that we produce the products that the world is going to need in 30 years' time. But also a problem that we have is to convince the world of some of this perhaps it's bad type thing with no basis behind it. That is a problem for us. That is a problem for the agricultural sector. And I think it's so vitally important that that the world comes to the realization if we're going to feed the world, we have to do it in a sound. We want to produce the best food in the world. We do in North America. And we have to make sure that the world understands that this is safe. That would be two of the issues that I would see.
Yeah, I agree. There are the challenges, both the production and the cost. And in that respect, as I mentioned, I'm optimistic that we will be able to meet the challenge to raise the production in the same land with the limitations that we have in some areas of the world. But we have to also to keep that we have to invest in technology, and that's it is somehow related one to the other. So if we are not able to incorporate the new advances in science and technology, then we will not be able to reduce the cost of production as well as to increase the productivity.
I think really it's, the question implies really one coin with two sides. I mean, increased production using technology, and that will help defer the increased costs as we're more productive. Certainly, I think based on most everything I know, while we see some lowering of cost, certainly input costs continue to rise, and agricultural inputs, much of that driven, frankly, by the technology that's helped us achieve increased productivity. So farmers are good business people. They will determine what the value of the technology versus the potential productivity versus the increased cost. And the marketplace, I think, will make that decision. I don't think it's an either or. Yes. We need the technology to continue. The consumers, the agricultural producers, will determine if that technology is beneficial to their helping them to reduce input costs or increase productivity. It's not a symmetrical issue in that regard. Okay, this is the last question, gentlemen. Y'all have done well. So this is the one you've been waiting for, right? Our countries share the use of European names for common food themes. The EU wants to limit the use of these geographical indications. What can we do? Lawrence has mentioned the fact that he's no longer a young farmer, and I think whoever put these questions on the screen here might have still been a young farmer with their font. So sorry to read so poorly, but our countries share the use of European names for common food themes, and the EU wants to limit the use of these geographical indicators. What can we do? Obviously, all of us have been imposed on by EU and their geographical indicators, and what would you say to that?
Sonny, number one, they had a great head start. That's one problem, and of course there's been small advances made, not enough by any means. And without a question, it's a problem, and it has to be handled with our negotiators. There's no question about it. I mean, when deals are put together, that is what has to take place. Without any question, it's a sticky problem without any question when you're negotiating deals with other countries in the European Union. So, I mean, we can't order them, or it is a major problem.
No comment.
Yeah, okay, I'll comment. This is particularly offensive to me. I'd like to brand or trademark Georgia peaches. You know, no, but you can't just say peaches. You got to say Georgia peaches, and that's kind of what Europe has done. They were a lot older than we. We were young farmers when they were very mature in designing all those names, and certainly with immigration, we brought a lot of those names all across the world to different places. I don't believe common food names ought to be trademarked or patented, and that's what's leading to this thing, and that's my opinion. I know that sometimes you feel like you're taken hostage about some of those negotiations, but frankly, it's offensive to me that we think we should trademark or patent or brand specific geographical indicators, because those names have been used freely over the period of time. If you look at trademark and patent laws here in this country, you can't go and assume a name that's been out there in the marketplace for many, many years and say it's ours. That's not allowed. So That's how I feel about it. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much. Sonny, thank you.
All right. All right. Thanks, everyone. Hey, we're going to take a break here. It's time for coffee break. It's